Just when Boeing was finally trying to fix its image, its reputation took a hit again.
Moments on a flight that took off from Los Angeles, passengers hearing a very loud noise and then sparks shooting from the engine.
The Dutch airline KLM suddenly grounded 7 of its Boeing 787 Dreamliners after suspecting a major problem. Flights were canceled, passengers were stuck at the airport, and once again, everyone started doubting Boeing and its reliability.
These are the final moments of Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner with more than 200 people on board, struggling to stay in the air.
This is already the third big incident tied to Boeing this year, and it is only getting worse. People are nervous, and Boeing is back in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. So what exactly did KLM find in those Dreamliners? Boeing's flying empire. In May 2025, Dutch airline KLM suddenly grounded 7 of its Boeing 787 Dreamliners. And it wasn't because of a crash or a mid-air emergency. It was because something didn't look right during a basic inspection. They noticed that maintenance on a specific refueling valve was not performed correctly. The valve in question required a different procedure on the Dreamliner. KLM didn't want to take any risks, so they immediately removed 7 long-haul jets from service to make sure everything was fixed properly. That might not sound huge, until you realize the 787 Dreamliner is the backbone of KLM's intercontinental fleet. Flights to North America, Africa, and Asia were either canceled or delayed. Hundreds of passengers were stranded, including 250 people heading to Mexico City who had to wait a full day for the next available aircraft. KLM said it wasn't a safety issue, but let's be real. Airlines don't ground nearly a third of their Dreamliner fleet unless something is seriously off. This was not the only incident involving Boeing this year, but Boeing was not always this controversial. In fact, for most of aviation history, it was the company every airline trusted. Let's go back for a second and look at what Boeing actually builds. Their lineup is massive. The most famous model is the 737 series, which includes the next generation and the 737 MAX. It is the best-selling aircraft of all time. More than 11,000 units have been delivered, and over 5,000 more are on order. These planes are used by every budget airline you can name, including Ryanair, Southwest, Fly Dubai, and a bunch of full-service ones too. They are the workhorses of short to medium-haul travel. But of course, the 737 MAX has its own dark history. The 2 crashes in 2018 and 2019 killed 346 people, led to a global grounding, and triggered criminal investigations. Even now, the MAX still makes people nervous. Then there is the 787 Dreamliner, the plane at the center of KLM's recent drama. It was launched as a new era of flying. The big selling point was that Boeing used carbon fiber reinforced composites for much of the airframe instead of traditional aluminum. That meant less weight, lower fuel costs, and longer range. On top of that, the Dreamliner has larger windows, better humidity levels, and smoother cabin pressure, which supposedly makes you feel less awful after a 10-hour flight. In theory, it is a marvel of engineering. In practice, it has been dogged by years of production delays, delivery freezes, and now safety concerns. Another famous Boeing aircraft is the 777, which has been in service since the mid-1990s. It is a wide-body, long-haul aircraft known for reliability and size. Some models can carry over 400 passengers. It is a favorite of international carriers like Emirates, Singapore Airlines, and Qatar Airways. Boeing is currently working on the 777, which is an updated version with folding wingtips and upgraded engines, but it is already running years behind schedule. Let's not forget the 747, the original jumbo jet. It revolutionized air travel in the 1970s with its double-decker hump and long-range capability. For decades, it was the face of global travel. Boeing officially ended 747 production in 2023, but many are still flying as cargo planes or government aircraft, including Air Force One. So yes, Boeing's aircraft range is impressive. But building airplanes is only half the story. The other half is how many countries depend on them. Boeing has a global footprint that's hard to match. Its planes are flown in over 150 countries. As of last year, more than 10,500 Boeing commercial jets were in active service worldwide. That includes everything from tiny regional flights in Southeast Asia to 15-hour ultra-long-haul trips between New York and Singapore. Boeing supplies aircraft to massive fleets like United, American Airlines, Lufthansa, Turkish Airlines, and ANA. Its biggest international clients include Emirates, Qatar Airways, and British Airways. KLM itself operates 24 Boeing 787s out of a total fleet of around 230 aircraft, and they are not alone. Over 70 airlines use Dreamliners. It is one of the most widely adopted wide-body aircraft on the planet. So when even a well-established government-backed airline like KLM says, "We are not flying this until we double-check," people start to panic. That's a ripple effect across the entire industry. Some travelers have even begun changing flights just to avoid Boeing planes. Airlines are noticing too. They may not all say it publicly, but the delays, inspections, and bad press create headaches they would rather avoid. And the scary part is that this was not Boeing's only incident this year. Cracks found in Boeing 787 Dreamliners. Back in April 2024, a Boeing quality engineer stepped forward and made a serious claim. They said that there could be internal cracks forming in the 787 Dreamliner, right near the joint where the wings meet the main body of the plane. That's not a place you want weaknesses. According to him, it was a manufacturing issue. Something about how the parts were joined and how small gaps were filled. These gaps are supposed to be shimmed. A thin layer is added to make sure everything fits perfectly and doesn't shift under stress. But according to the whistleblower, those shims were skipped in some places. And over time, that could mean cracks forming where the pressure is highest. This was not a small thing. Boeing responded quickly, saying there were no confirmed cracks in planes that had gone through heavy maintenance. They insisted that hundreds of in-service Dreamliners were inspected and nothing was found. They even said they shared all the results with the FAA. On paper, that sounds reassuring. But other airlines didn't exactly relax. While Boeing denied the issue, carriers around the world started inspecting their own 787 fleets more closely. They did not make any big announcements, though, because whether or not cracks were found, the fact that a structural concern even came up was enough to shake confidence. It is not that the planes were falling apart mid-air, but when people hear the word cracks and Boeing in the same sentence, especially after what happened with the MAX, they don't wait around for a press release. They get nervous. And so do the airlines. At this point, every new issue, every inspection, every whistleblower statement is hurting Boeing, especially after 3 major incidents that happened this year alone. Boeing reputation crisis. You would think, after everything with the 737 MAX a few years ago, Boeing would be playing it safe, double-checking everything, making sure no headlines show up with their name next to emergency landing or investigation underway. But that's not how 2024 and 2025 have gone. Let's go back to January 5th, 2024. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 had just taken off from Portland, Oregon. It was a brand new Boeing 737 MAX 9. It was just weeks old. And then mid-air, a panel blew off the side of the plane. Not just any panel, but the door plug, which is supposed to seal an emergency exit that's not in use. It ripped clean off at 16,000 feet. The sudden cabin decompression was terrifying. Oxygen masks dropped, wind roared through the hole, and passengers started screaming. Personal belongings were sucked out into the sky. Even a child's shirt was torn from his body. Miraculously, no one was killed or seriously injured, but it could have been much worse. The part that blew off left a massive hole right next to occupied seats. The FAA grounded 171 Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets for emergency inspections. Airlines like Alaska and United scrambled to pull planes from service. Flights were canceled for days. The National Transportation Safety Board later found that 4 critical bolts used to secure the door plug were missing. Investigators suggested the bolts were likely removed during factory work and never put back in. Boeing admitted that the fuselage section had been built by Spirit Aerosystems, but final installation was Boeing's job. The FAA even launched a formal audit of Boeing's safety protocols, which uncovered multiple quality control failures across the board. As if that wasn't enough, just a few weeks later, another incident hit the headlines. This time, it was an international flight. Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, crashed shortly after takeoff. The flight had departed from Mumbai and was headed to Frankfurt. According to early reports, the aircraft lost altitude seconds after takeoff and struggled to maintain power. The plane hit the ground just beyond the runway perimeter. All but one of the 230 people on board were killed. The investigation is still ongoing. The leading theories are that there was a mechanical failure involving the thrust control system and possible engine anomalies. This crash sent shockwaves across the global aviation community. The 787 was supposed to be the future of long-haul flying, but the Air India crash raised an urgent question. Were the design compromises worth it? While no official blame has been assigned, airlines flying Dreamliners have quietly tightened their checks, especially on newer fleets or aircraft fresh out of maintenance. And just when things looked like they couldn't get worse, Japan Airlines had a terrifying mid-air scare of its own. On June 30, 2025, a Boeing 787-9 flying from Tokyo to Sapporo suffered a sudden cabin depressurization. At an altitude of 26,000 feet, warning lights went off, oxygen masks deployed, and the pilots initiated an emergency descent. The plane landed safely, but the experience left passengers shaken. It was not turbulence or a medical emergency. This was a structural issue, and those don't just happen out of nowhere. Japan's aviation authorities launched a formal investigation. Preliminary findings pointed to faulty cabin seals and pressure regulation valves. These were parts that had reportedly been inspected less than 2 months earlier. While no injuries were reported, the airline immediately grounded multiple Dreamliners for internal checks. And once again, it was another Boeing model making headlines, and not in a good way. By this point, the public didn't need another reason to worry, but they got one anyway: social media. The phrase, "if it's Boeing, I'm not going," went viral. First it was TikTok videos. Then it spread to Twitter, Reddit, YouTube comments, and travel blogs. It wasn't just a one-off trend. It became a full-blown customer movement. People started checking their flight numbers, Googling aircraft types before booking, and even canceling flights just to avoid being on a Boeing plane. And let's be honest, this is not just dramatic behavior. When passengers see a company tied to 3 serious incidents in 6 months, it is not paranoia anymore. Even travel influencers and aviation bloggers, who usually love showcasing premium cabins and in-flight experiences, started speaking out. They were getting questions like, "Is it safe to fly Boeing?" or "Should I switch to Airbus?" And the answers weren't exactly confident. Airlines are feeling the pressure too. When Alaska and United had to ground their MAX 9s, they lost millions in revenue and had to apologize to thousands of stranded passengers. KLM, as we already saw, took no chances and parked their Dreamliners to avoid future problems. And even though some of these issues stem from parts suppliers or maintenance crews, the Boeing name is the one people remember. It is always Boeing's reputation that takes the hit. Let's also not forget the FAA's official audit, released after the Alaska incident. It found Boeing and its key suppliers had multiple instances of failing to meet manufacturing quality standards. That's an actual statement from the top U.S. aviation regulator. And that audit was launched because the FAA believed Boeing might still be cutting corners, after all the scrutiny it already went through. On top of all this mess, Boeing's own CEO, David Calhoun, announced he is stepping down later this year. He is leaving right in the middle of one of the company's worst credibility crises. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. In the end, we are left with the fact that Boeing is the aircraft millions of people trust every day. But right now, that trust is wearing thin. So, after all this, would you still trust flying on a Boeing plane? Tell us what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates. Goodbye for now.